What's up everyone, it's Prometheus, and today, as you can see, my counter looks a little bit different. I've got a lot more room for activities and I'm going to need it because I'm going to literally be pulling, or I guess pushing shots on the FLAIR Pro. Of course, as they say on Sprudge, Spros disclose, so I will say FLAIR did send me this unit to use in a dial-in video. So first things first, let's talk about preparation and grind, and why these things are so important. So let's take a look at our brew chamber. So this is where the water that we're going to use to brew our espresso is going to be. As you can see, it's a pretty thick piston. It's all stainless steel. We've got an O-ring there. And what we're going to do is prep the piston by pushing it back with the dosing chamber. And we've got it ready to go, ready to be pressed. From here, we're going to put on our little heat cap. Basically, this goes over the top and seals it closed. We're going to flip it over, and we're going to put hot water in there until it's all the way full. This is key to making sure that your brew temp is going to be nice and consistent all the way through. Alright, well that's heating up. We're going to set it aside for about 30-40 seconds, and we're going to look at our portafilter. So this is our portafilter. Comes with a little dosing cup and a dosing funnel. We're just going to use the funnel today because it fits right into my grinder with the funnel on top. So I'm just going to put it in and I'm going to grind my coffee. And speaking of grinding, let's look at grind size for a moment. When it comes to problems with espresso and making espresso, the one thing I always focus on with people is grind. Grind is hugely important and it's kind of tricky. Not all fine are created equal. There's definitely little levels of fine. And if you're looking at coffee like this, let's say for example, a couple of clues that can tell you that a grind may be too fine is some clumping. If you're getting a little bit of clumping, that sometimes is normal depending on your grinder, but for this grinder, I don't see a lot of clumps often, and I feel like the grind is just a little too fine, a little too clumpy, and between my fingers it feels almost like damp sand. It's a little sticky. So we're looking at next grind level, and this one is, in my mind, a little too coarse. You can kind of tell just by looking at it. You can see that the particle size is pretty big. And specifically, like if you're using a coffee that has a little bit of that silver skin, like a washed coffee, for example, you'll see those little white speckles. Those are pretty big, and you can kind of see that that grind is just not super fine. And that might just be a bit too fast of a shot. You're not going to get the same level of extraction, and it feels a lot like, you know, sea salt or coarse black pepper. And we can't talk espresso grinds without talking about the grinder. So of course you need a good burr grinder, but this is also a stepped grinder. I would highly recommend using a grinder that has a lot of movement and a lot of options for grind size, because between, let's say, 1 and 2 on here, that is the space where a good shot would be, but it won't lock in. Here is a stepless grinder. So these notches are only here for grip, and it can turn freely, and you can make minute adjustments to your grind and find that perfect point to get your nice, perfect extraction and perfect time for your espresso. As with most espresso preparations, you want to make sure you're being as accurate as possible with the grinds you're putting in. So I want to make sure I'm putting exactly 17 grams in on our portafilter here, and then we're going to set it up for tamping. So just like a standard portafilter, again, we're going to distribute nice and cleanly, filling in any gaps with our fingers, cleaning the rim, and tamping. Tamping here is not a 30-pound process. I tamp relatively light on this. I just pushed until I felt a little bit of resistance from the grounds and then stopped. Now we can admire our nice flat little bed here and prep up the rest of the shot. So we're going to drop our screen in, and don't press too hard, just get it so it's nice and flat on the bed, and we'll get our brew chamber. So this is all nice and warmed up now. We're going to pull off the seal, and we're going to put our portafilter into the brew chamber. This is super simple. It's just a nice little snap together, and it's ready to rock and roll. We're adding our brew water now. Here is kind of depending on how long your shot wants to be. Generally, I like to pull just a little bit longer, so I'm going to put about 50 to 60 grams of water in there. Now we're going to add our stem. That's also basically the plunger, and if you have the Pro version, you have a pressure gauge on there as well. it gets dropped into the ring, and now we're ready to brew. And now let's talk about pulling shots and observing extraction cues. So in this portion of the video, I'm going to show you 3 different shots, one with the grind too fine, one with the grind too coarse, and one with it just right. So this first shot will be the grind that's too fine. As we begin adding pressure, we'll notice that it's a lot harder to push down than normal. It's barely dripping out, and as you can see, you're having to use excessive amount of force to try and get this to come out, which is no good. You can see the whole machine is shaking, the pressure is over 10, and it's barely dripping out. And the one thing you'll notice too when it comes to cleanup, that the puck will be very muddy, and you'll have to basically scoop it out of there with a spoon, so that's no good. Next up, we have a shot with the grind that's too coarse. So this is going to be obvious really quickly too, that it's just going to be running way too fast, almost out of control. So as I begin to add pressure, you'll notice right away it's spurting, it's channeling, and it's flowing really fast. There's very little pressure needed to pull it all out, and it just ran all through super fast. You'll also notice that there's very little crema, and just a thin, watery shot. And last but not least, we have the shot that's just right. So when you start applying pressure, you should notice that when you start applying a good amount of pressure, you'll notice it should extract relatively quickly, but it shouldn't be just dumping out. It should be a pretty controlled stream. The entire bottom of your portafilter should be pretty full. There shouldn't be any channeling or any spurting, and just apply a nice even pressure all the way through. If you let up, you risk allowing back pressure to push the chamber out, or you're just going to get some over extracted coffee. So just keep the pressure on, and if you look at the shot itself, you can see it looks just like a standard shot of espresso. You've got the layers, you've got the crema, everything's running nice and smoothly still, and we're looking at about a 30 to 35 second shot, and it's just really nice and clean and creates just the perfect shot of espresso. So everything looked good, but let's find out how it tastes, because that's going to be key to success. But wait, we aren't done yet. Let's say that shot of espresso just didn't taste the way we want it. There's a couple things we can do. So one thing to remember with grinding is there is no magic number. Your grind today that's perfect will be too coarse or too fine in a matter of hours. You always need to be adjusting the grind. And also, temperature is hugely important, so make sure you're filling your chamber just off of boil to preheat and close to 200 degrees Fahrenheit for brewing. And let's say we may have a shot that's running close to or within the parameters that you're aiming for, but it doesn't taste the way you want it. That can be handled in a couple ways. So finer grind will make the output less bright, and if you do less out or less yield, there will be a thicker body, enhanced sweetness, but a little less clarity. And the opposite is true if you go a bit coarser. So coarser will make it a little less bitter, and if you add more yield or more output, you'll have a thinner body, a little more balance, and more clarity. So depending on the coffee and what you're going to do with it, those two things are things you can definitely play with. If you aren't getting the results you want, only change one variable at a time. If you're changing both the grind, the dose, and the pressure, you're going to be chasing that dragon and wasting tons of coffee trying to get that perfect shot. So to start, just focus on changing the grind and then working your way backwards from there. Remember, espresso is an exploratory process. It's important not to focus too much on chasing numbers, but looking to aim for the right taste. And taste your bad shots too. They give you a better idea of what extraction does and what flavors are coming out during different points in the shot. And last but not least, just enjoy the ride. Espresso is a lot of fun, and there's a lot of things you can do with this machine that you can't do with a standard pump machine without buying a really expensive unit that allows you to do pressure profiling. This really does give you the opportunity to toy with lots of different unique variables in terms of pressure and in terms of temperatures. So enjoy the coffee, enjoy the FLAIR. Shout out to Andrew and the whole FLAIR team for hooking me up with this unit. I'm really stoked to have it. Keep an eye out for new videos featuring it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at Prometheus, the blog at Prometheus.com. New videos every Friday. And as always, stay caffeinated, Pony Boy.